She didn't want to run, look over her shoulder, or hide in the city's shadows. However, her father, in an act of utter stupidity, sold her to the gang that controlled her housing block. Now she was running hard, with 3 gang members chasing her. Her fate seemed sealed since her species wasn't built for endurance. They could run in short bursts, but her pursuers were Velite insectoids, tireless, emotionless, and relentless. She stumbled into an alleyway, gasping for breath, only to find herself trapped at a dead end. Her muscles were at their limits, her lungs straining for air, and her fur was soaked and heavy from the rain. Was this the end? After 2 weeks of freedom, hunted constantly, it seemed her journey was over. Desperately, she looked around for a weapon, but the alley was empty, except for the body of a homeless person. The gang members scuttled in seconds later, their mandibles clicking as they spoke. Their translators converted their alien dialect into galactic common. "See, the Lopups are stupid and can't sense or remember terrain," said the largest one, standing nearly 6 units tall as it rose from its octopedal stance. Yeah, stupid and dumb," responded the smallest one. "So what now, brothers? What were our orders?" "Boss wants her whole and unblemished. Apparently he has a fancy for her," the middle one said, likely the leader of the trio. "Fuck you," she cursed back, her hand rummaging through her pockets for anything useful. All she found was a small penknife. "Come on now. We aren't the bad guys. We are just the delivery boys. If you cooperate, we'll be nice and buy you some grub and a change of clothes," the middle one offered. She glanced around. There were a few windows above, but the city was mostly deserted at this hour. Her chances of escape were dwindling to 0. Desperate, she broke her own rules and took a deep breath, screaming as loud as she could. "Someone, please save me." The 3 Valmites pounced, their bodies casting a shadow over her like a veil of despair. She shut her eyes tight, not ready for what was coming. Suddenly, a sickening crunch made her eyes snap open. 2 of the Valmites had backed off. The smallest lay on the ground, its head caved in. A tall alien stood in front of her, its back to her, fists clenched, one covered in thick, ichor-like Valmite blood. "Yeah, I heard enough to know I can't sit back and watch. Not when you call out for help like that," the alien said. Its clear tone and voice revealed it was a human. She realized that the homeless person she had seen earlier wasn't dead. Humans were considered the lowest of the low, with no rights or protections in the Empire's territories. Their homeworld had been destroyed before the Empire found them. Though tolerated, they were worse than the scum chasing her. But this human had stepped in and saved her, so maybe, if she played her cards right, it would protect her. "They have orders to kidnap me and sell me into slavery. Your kind don't stand for such practices," she said, hoping to appeal to his sense of justice. "Please help me," she pleaded, her voice carrying a mix of innocence and desperation. The middleman, quick to respond and evaluating his options, didn't waste any time. "No, her father sold her off to pay his debt. We're just here to collect," he retorted, relaxing slightly and signaling his larger companion to do the same. "Besides, if you help us, we'll split the bounty with you. 4,000 credits can go a long way for someone like you." I bet it would," the human responded, pulling out a long, serrated combat knife. "But I don't go back on my choices, and I don't need money." He glanced over his shoulder at her, his cybernetically augmented eyes glowing red. "Are you a citizen of the Empire?" he asked. She nodded hesitantly, confused by the seemingly random question. Her homeworld was intact and paid its tithe regularly. "Stay there. I'll deal with the trash," the human said, charging at the Valmites. She had no time to ponder his choice of words as the battle unfolded before her eyes. To her shock and horror, the human was in complete control, dispatching the Valmites within a minute. His combat knife seemed redundant as his fists alone were enough to crack the exoskeletons of the Valmites. To call what he did anything less than a slaughter would be an understatement. He ripped the large one's arms and legs off before crushing its thorax with his boot, and sliced the middle one into 3 pieces with 2 swift, effortless swings. He then flicked the blade to remove most of the blood and wiped it clean on a rag before sheathing it again. Looking over at her, he smiled softly. Don't worry, Rumi. I will protect you, he said as he walked back towards her. She stared at the human in shock, trying to recall what she knew about his kind. Her memory was limited, but she discerned that the human in front of her was male, taller than average, and most likely a former soldier. Thank you, she stammered, unsure of what to do. My name is Dan Smith, he said, gathering his few possessions. I am Zader Mayos, but my friends call me Zale, she replied, still unsure of what was happening. The word he used to address her, Rumi, lingered in her mind. What is a Rumi? She asked. He smiled broadly. Humans can't rent or own homes, so you are now my roommate. I have enough to pay for a few years and other necessities, but everything will be in your name. Deal? He extended his hand to her. Recognizing the gesture as something void merchants used to seal a bargain, she contemplated whether living with a human was worth the risk and stigma. It didn't matter. He was offering his skills and protection in exchange for a place to stay, a sentiment she could agree with. She shook his hand firmly. Deal. Zale walked a bit behind Dan as they moved away from her HAB unit and toward the edge of the HAB block. He was tall, nearly 6'2", and built for war, with dark brown skin and hair braided back into a short tail. Scars marked his exposed skin, and his clothes, though shabby, were a uniform from the last war with the Zanan Confederacy. So, Dan, you fought in the last war. Why? She asked slowly, seeking insight into the human. Oh, yeah. When you're homeless and in need of a bed and food, fighting is a step up. You get 3 squares and a cot, he replied, slowing his pace so they could walk side by side, his duffel bag slung over his shoulder. I mean, I would have been fighting gangers anyway. At least on the battlefield, it's easy to tell friend from foe. But you're worldless. You gain nothing from fighting for the Empire. So why fight at all? She asked, as they descended in an elevator to the lower levels of the HAB block. He rubbed his chin thoughtfully. Because humanity has a permanent grudge against the Zanan Confederacy, he said ominously. Oh, I see, she muttered, sensing that this line of questioning might touch on sensitive topics for him. Anyway, let's focus on finding a place to live, he said, stepping off the elevator and walking not toward the administration office but to the gate out of the arcology she had known as home. Wait, where are you going? She asked, her voice tinged with worry. She took a tentative half-step towards the safety he offered, but hesitated, fearful of leaving the familiar comfort of her world. He paused, looking back with a soft and understanding smile. You've never left your HAB block before, have you? Don't worry, Zale. I'll be right beside you. We're just going 2 HAB blocks over, an hour walk at most. Zale couldn't stop herself from nervously gulping, but she took his hand as he offered it. She clung tightly to him as they left her familiar surroundings. The sky above was much wider than she had ever imagined, and the streets were spacious with ground vehicles traveling on designated roadways. Her eyes flickered with every small sound, each one causing her ears to twitch, as her mind conjured up images of drawing blades or cocking firearms. However, his presence next to her grounded her fear and anxiety somewhat. You are a Lopup, right? He asked with a small smile. Your kind comes from Elpo Prime? She nodded. Yeah, is that a problem? She asked nervously, her ears drooping slightly as fear began to take hold of her demeanor. Nah, you bunny folk are great company, and your ways aren't too far from what humans value, he said warmly. Bunny folk? She asked, unfamiliar with the human nickname for her people. He smiled softly. Oh, sorry. Bunnies are a type of mammalian animal from Earth, small and fluffy with ears like yours, so we sometimes call your kind bunny folk. She reached up and felt her long ears, running her fingers through them. Oh, so your people nicknamed us after predators from your world. He burst into hearty laughter. What? No, bunnies are prey animals that were mostly domesticated by the time of the Sundering. The home fleet has a colony in every livestock hangar. She seemed confused. Your people keep animals alive on your ships? She asked, recalling seeing the human home fleet in the night sky once, 5 years ago, like a roaming constellation of thousands of stars. Yeah, humans are omnivores, and we need both meat and vegetables to live. So when we were preparing to escape Earth, we took as much genetic material as possible to clone our animal companions and friends, he explained slowly, a warm smile on his lips. Once we got our hands on artificial gravity tech, we built our first farm bay. Once it was deemed safe, acceptable, and humane, we built one on every ship. She was stunned and shocked by the revelation. But is it enough to feed a ship? He smiled. No, a single farm bay can't feed an entire ship of thousands, but that's what the agri-ships are for. Agricultural ships? She pondered aloud. You have ships in your fleet completely dedicated to growing and feeding your population? Got to go to one once. It was crazy, but somehow completely organized and handled well, he said, reminiscing. One agri-ship can feed about 50 ships or one of our supercarriers. She felt a bit nervous. Should you be telling me this? He smiled. There's a saying for anyone that deals with the home fleet. Watch your fire or see your world crack. We let most off with a warning, but those who try to push their supposed claims of strength, we break their fleets and teach them a truth that makes the supergovernments of the galaxy nervous. And what is that? She asked nervously. Earth was a death world. As they moved closer to their new hab block, which looked no different from her last one, his last comment left a lingering silence between them. He cleared his throat and held out a credit chip. Okay, here. Go to the admin office, get a small family unit, and don't answer anything beyond your basic information. Also, if they ask, claim I am your bodyguard and don't tell them where you are from. Nervously, she took the chip and pocketed it. Taking a deep breath to steady herself, she walked into the administration office and found the renter's desk. She was relieved to see a Lopup sitting behind the desk. Excuse me, I would like to rent a small family unit, she said. The Lopup at the desk, a man, looked over with a sigh. How many inhabitants? 2 medium entities, she said, taking steadying breaths. The officer looked over and out the window. You can't rent a unit with a human. He is my bodyguard. All payments and naming are my responsibility, she replied, placing the credit chip down. The officer groaned, took the chip, checked it, and coughed in surprise. I see. I believe we can get you situated, he said quickly, typing away at his terminal. Can I get yours and your bodyguard's names? I am Zadar Mayos. My bodyguard is named Dan, she replied. She spoke quickly, omitting her last name in case he attempted to look her up in the planetary records. He entered the information and checked her occupation, self-employed. But my business is legal and permitted in Empire space. It's not significant enough for you to record, she added, trying to sound confident and in control. The officer looked confused and glanced at the readout on her credit chip. Very well. I have a unit available on level 56, grid B, door 320. Let me fetch the key badges, he said, standing up and walking over to a locker behind him. He retrieved 2 badges for her and Dan. Please process the first 2 payments now, she instructed, taking the badges and clipping one to her belt. Of course, the officer replied, typing something into the chip reader. A soft beep from his phone indicated the transfer of funds, and he skimmed a bit off the top for himself, a common practice among many low-end workers. After processing the real payment, he handed her back the chip. There, all squared away. Thank you. I will make payments at the start of every month going forward. We will not announce our departure from the unit, she said, taking back the chip and checking how much had been taken. She smiled a bit, noting that the officer had taken a typical sum, which she was told meant minimal gang activity. Understandable. We hope you enjoy your stay here, the officer said as she walked away. Dan looked over as she stepped out. So, 56B320, and the officer took less than in my last habitation block, so fewer gangs, she said optimistically. He smiled softly and looked around, spotting only one gang marker drawn over others. That's good. But I think the cut was less because there is only one gang here, and they have a monopoly on illegal activity and better control over the administration. She frowned, not having considered that possibility. Oh, is that bad? He patted her head, cheering her up. No, it's not bad as long as they aren't affiliated with the gang that holds your father's debt. Besides, I don't think we will stay on this world for long. What? She asked, shocked, as they walked to the elevator. Yeah, sorry to say this, but a gang that can house and keep Valide will have the influence to hunt you down anywhere on this planet, he said, as the elevator started to move. We just needed somewhere with access to the data net and walls for defense while I call in a ride. Call a ride? Like from the home fleet? She asked nervously. The thought of leaving her birth world was a dream of all children, to travel the void and see distant worlds spoken of in news and stories. He chuckled. No, not the fleet. Just a friend who should be passing through. She should be here in a month or two, he said, but looked around as the elevator stopped halfway up the massive structure. The maintenance sign flickered on as the doors opened. Come on, there's another elevator nearby. As they walked, she felt a chill run down her fur like a charge of static, setting her nerves on edge. Why does it feel like someone is watching me? She asked. Because we were just scanned. The wall we passed has a sensor suite built under it, he whispered, taking her hand gently and keeping her moving. Why? Who? She asked quickly, her ears perking up and scanning the area. Most likely the gang that runs the habitation block, he said with a smile. They are trying to figure us out. See, the chip I gave you marks you as a diplomat, but doesn't specify which government you belong to. What? She asked, horrified, feeling used. Relax. They are confused because I am here. No diplomat would hire a human as a bodyguard, he said softly, as they reached a new elevator and pressed the call button. Are we in danger? She asked softly. Not yet, but when we get to the unit, I need you to make a barricade to hide behind. With luck, I can get them to back off, but it may still get messy, he said as they rode the elevator up to the 56th floor.